I'm Dr. Tyeshia Redden. I'm an assistant professor of urban planning in the Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto, and I specialize in social policy and spatial injustice. Today we're going to take a look at The Crow, The People Under the Stairs, and Vampires vs. the Bronx.
Why don't you tell me a story? A man and a woman in law a year ago. You killed them.
There's something huge missing from The Crow, and that's the actual city of Detroit. So although the film, according to the lore, is actually set in Detroit, it was filmed in Los Angeles and Wilmington, North Carolina, on sound stages. Detroit is the blackest US city, with 78% of its population being black, and along with that has been highly stigmatized with issues like crime, drug use, urban disinvestment. So what the filmmakers here are actually doing by setting the film in Detroit is using Detroit as a shorthand for all of those social ills. Also, as I mentioned, because it's the blackest US city, there's very few black people in this movie. And the ones that are, the character of the police officer played by Ernie Hudson, they're supporting characters. And so it's really interesting that in this city that we know is very black, we see very few black people actually on screen, and instead, the city of Detroit is used as this symbol of urban decay. This film gets romanticized as this tragedy of, star-crossed lovers taken too soon, and it is that. But Eric and his girlfriend are actually murdered, not in a random act of violence, but because they are organizing their fellow tenants against rent evictions, against their greedy landlord.
Department of Housing. Code violations? Safety hazard? Place looks fine to me. Let's redecorate.
There's actually a lot of commentary about the commodification of housing, about landlords, about rent evictions. We have allowed real estate speculation to run rampant. We've allowed the commodification of a basic human need. People have to live somewhere. So I think that The Crow in this way serves this kind of dual purpose. It allows us to be critical of the ways that blackness has been erased from the landscape of cities, but also used as shorthand for all the bad things about cities. And it also lets us understand that there are very insidious forces that are not, in this case, being pushed back by the supernatural, but that are definitely targeting people who are critical of this system of commodification we've created for society. Other scholars have even remarked on the fact that it's a part of a film lineage of white saviors in black spaces. There's this titular character who is going to right the wrongs. And the overall antagonist is white as well, right? So it kind of suggests that there is this white power structure that is targeting and preying on communities, but it is this white guy who comes along to kind of save the day.
Give me the girl, and I'll let you walk out of here.
Well, why don't you just give me a minute to think about that, huh?
I love this scene where it says demolished by neglect, because I think it's really on the nose commentary about these inner cities in the 1990s, that they were allowed to decay because Black and brown communities did not have the political clout nor the financial affluence to garner much support. This phrasing of demolished by neglect, right? Not demolished because it burnt down or it was knocked down, but demolished because it was simply left to decay.
Why Mama crying?
Y'all been evicted. You gotta be out tomorrow midnight. Guess Ruby didn't see that one in the cards.
But why?
You're 3 days late with your payment. Fine print in the lease says you gotta pay triple, else get out. Well, your mama and Ruby ain't got triple.
Well, don't the landlord know that Mama's sick or Ruby got babies?
The People Under the Stairs surface level is about this black kid who needs to get rent money before his family gets evicted by these evil racist landlords. But I think if we dig deeper, there is a plethora of social commentary on housing, on racism, and on the history of public policy in the US. So for instance, the main antagonists, the racist landlords, the Robesons, are actually dressed and styled to resemble Ronald and Nancy Reagan. whose, urban policies really entrenched urban poverty in cities, particularly amongst Black and brown people. We're still feeling the effects of that today.
My name is Fool. What's yours?
Alice.
Don't be scared. You never seen a brother before?
Never had a brother.
No, I mean a black dude.
This particular scene is really interesting because we have the introduction of a frequently reoccurring trope of Black guy meets white girl. And so what we know from the works of scholar and kind of the mother of investigative journalism, Ida B. Wells, is that the vast majority of lynchings of Black men were blamed upon their alleged sexual relationships with white women. And in her investigation, what she found was that that was actually the most prevalent reasoning given for lynchings, but that most lynchings were actually economically based. So perhaps a white resident owed a Black resident money, perhaps a Black resident opened a competing business, and they would find themselves lynched. And so we continue to see this trope over and over again, that there is this sort of innocent white girl who meets this sort of street savvy, more experienced and worldly Black guy. We understand that it is intentional because the Robinsons themselves immediately pick up on this trope and talk about the dangers of Fool being free in the house with their little girl.
He's in there right now. With our little angel.
What I really like about this relationship, it actually itself is very full of social commentary as well. So for instance, when Fool is able to get out of a window and escape from the confines of the Robinson home and all of his horrors, he asks Alice to come with him. And Alice is too afraid to liberate herself.
Alice, come on, we gotta jump.
I can't. I'm afraid.
You upstairs, Alice?
The allegory is like right on the nose, right? But to take the metaphorical leap, and Alice is afraid of what lies beyond, right? She is terrified on a daily basis of being in the confines of this home, right? This home that is based on racism, that is based on patriarchy, but she's even more afraid of the uncertainty that lies beyond it.
My name is Ruby Williams, and I represent the Association of People who have been unjustly evicted, exploited, and generally fucked over.
What?
You and your brother are landlords of over 50 buildings in this city, all of which you've allowed to deteriorate into rat-infested hellholes where you guys get rich charging ridiculous rents. Then, you evict anyone the minute they can't pay rent so you can tear down their home and build some more office buildings. Ain't that about right?
None of your goddamn business!
It's really awesome to see the progression of these characters move beyond simply survival, right, to solidarity. And so the impetus and the driver of these characters of Fool and his sister Ruby are no longer to simply make sure they get the rent so they don't get evicted, but is to actually form coalition and community with other affected residents, right? And so Ruby is no longer concerned for herself or her own family's eviction, but it's about tearing down this whole system of commodification and really speaking to the fact that capitalism won't save us. It's actually how we got here in the first place. And really exposes the realities of landlords. A lot of the rhetoric around landlords and justification of this system is that they provide housing. And it's not that they provide housing, it's that they extract rent. What Vampires vs. the Bronx does really well is showcase for us the Bronx, and particularly the overlapping demographics of African Americans and Latinos, because historically, the Bronx was one of the boroughs in which African Americans were pushed to because of racial segregation. And as we start to see waves of migration, the first that kind of get pushed out are Afro-Latinos. The fact that they are Latino doesn't really matter in the face of American racism. And so you end up having this overlapping because of proximity, intermarrying. That sort of phenomenon is actually what gives us hip hop as a culture in the late 70s and early 1980s. And it really comes out of a convergence of youth who are disillusioned by deindustrialization. They are old enough to have seen the remnants of the civil rights era, of the Black Power era, and were too young to participate, but old enough to recognize that all the goals of those movements have not been achieved. And so I think this film does a great job of showcasing the South Side Bronx, and particularly those overlapping demographics.
Oh, and if you see a kid that's riding a bike 2 sizes too big for him, that's this little man trying to save the neighborhood all by himself. Oh, and speaking of saving the neighborhood, what's up with all these missing person flyers? I thought this new construction was supposed to make this place safer. Something to think about, y'all. Malaysia.
And it's really interesting that the character of Gloria says that, like, I thought all this new construction was supposed to make the Bronx safer. The interesting thing about that statement is that the understanding that redevelopment makes a neighborhood safer is really based on the idea that redevelopment pushes Black and brown people out, right? We're the actual danger. And so it's like, safer for who?
Listen, the vampire killed him. We need to tell someone.
Bro, ain't nobody gonna care that Slim disappeared?
Why? Because he's a gangbanger?
Nah, homie. Because he's from the Bronx, like us.
This scene is really speaking to the devaluation of Black lives. The fact that people's lives don't matter. This is a resounding and reoccurring sentiment in Black and brown communities. I mean, the most famous of it being the phrase and the social movement of Black Lives Matter. The introduction of vampires, right, is a very on-the-nose allegory for the ways that real estate developers and gentrifiers are like sucking the life force of these communities. It is commentary on Euclidean zoning. The origins of Euclidean zoning really get started by a lawsuit that finds its way to this US Supreme Court. And in the majority opinion that upholds what will become known as Euclidean zoning, the idea that you can separate land uses, right? So this is our commercial district, this is our industrial district, this is residential housing. Apartment buildings, which were highly associated with Black and brown communities, like renters unable to be homeowners, right, were specifically referenced as parasites to the landscape. So as soon as I saw that this film was gonna contain vampires and the vampires were like gentrifiers and real estate developers, was that this was commentary on this historic zoning case that referred to Black and brown people as parasites.
I've survived 7 centuries, countless attacks. I'm the most formidable creature on Earth. And you're just a bunch of poor kids from this shithole you call the Bronx.
Hey, yo! Yo, fuck you say about the Bronx? I know you just didn't call the Bronx a shithole.
Community is always the answer, right? Solidarity is always the answer. And I think that conversations like this even expand beyond the disciplinary boundaries of urban planning. When people talk about healthcare and public health equity, when people are talking about political mobilization, when people are talking about labor rights, the answer is more community. The film is really reminding its audiences that that is where true power lies. Vivian says that she's formidable and she's endured for centuries, but she's no match for the people of the Bronx. I think the theme of community is kind of spun through each of these films. We see it in The Crow. The film is really centering the story of Eric and Shelley, but there are also these kind of B-plots that show us that Eric and Shelley had positive impacts on the people around them, like the character of Sarah, and how they were actually assassinated because they were quite beloved in their community. I think also when we look at The People Under the Stairs, part of what makes the ending like so fulfilling is actually seeing the entire community take on the Robesons and, you know, the money flying through the air. And the titular people under the stairs being free, right, and accepted by the community residents, right? That film literally ends on the note of community, as does Vampires versus the Bronx, right? Miguel and his friends pat themselves on the back at the end that they are really good at vampire hunting, right? But the reality is that they would not have survived that final assault without the backing of their neighborhood.